Douglas, as usual, dropped his son off at school and turned to him and said, "Connor, please make sure that neither the class teacher nor the principal call me again to complain about your behavior. I am tired of getting ashamed every time I'm told off for your bad behavior." "Okay, Dad," the boy nodded obediently and, waving his father goodbye, ran off to school. Connor did well in almost all subjects, but he had difficulties with literature. However, the boy was not too worried about it. His father was the director of a large construction company, and he was the sponsor of the school as well. So Connor was sure that if something would go wrong, his father would use his influence, and they wouldn't dare to give Connor a bad grade. And so it was, and up to a certain moment, the boy was forgiven for everything. But then one day, the literature teacher had to go to the hospital for surgery. Of course, the children took the news of the teacher's illness with excitement, hoping that it would be easier for them to get good grades with a substitute teacher. "You rejoiced too early," grinned the principal. "The substitute teacher is quite strict, and you won't be fooling around with her. She isn't Mrs. Martin, who pretended not to notice how you cheat on your tests and take your essays off the internet." The kids were alarmed, and the principal told them that the new teacher used to work in prison. "Has she been guarding in the tower with a gun?" asked Connor, and the class burst out laughing. "Well, of course not, but she taught literature in the juvenile colony, so she is a very tough woman, and she will definitely behave," said the principal as seriously as possible. The children's imagination drew a horrible picture, and all the children froze in astonishment, and the principal, satisfied with the effect she had produced, went on about her business. When the next day Miss Bailey, the new literature teacher, entered, the 8th graders exhaled. A skinny, short, blue-eyed blonde with a soft smile did not produce the impression of oppressive supervisors, and children thought that the principal intentionally intimidating them. But they rejoiced too early. It turned out that Miss Bailey had a strong character and iron restraint. She immediately stopped all provocations, and even in the most difficult situations did not once raise her voice. Each misbehaving student was enough just a glance of her blue eyes, which immediately became cold and prickly, and a kind smile was not a trace. At the same time, she explained the material so well that even the slowest student in the class could understand her. As a result, no one ever managed to ruin the lesson, and over time, it became clear that Miss Bailey was a great teacher who truly cared about her students' success. Over time, Miss Bailey has become an absolute authority for all the pupils except for Connor. He disliked the new teacher from the beginning and stubbornly continued to do everything to make her mad, completely neglecting his studies. Even his classmates could not understand why he was angry with the new teacher, and repeatedly tried to talk some sense into him. "I don't like her, that's all," was Connor's usual response. The boy continued his hooligan antics, relying on his father's authority at school. However, near the end of the quarter, it became clear that Connor was failing literature. As a result, the principal summoned the boy's father to the school and invited the teacher to talk to him as well. "Connor is not interested in studying at all," Miss Bailey told the boy's father. "There are exams coming up, and if things continue like this, I'm afraid that Connor will have serious problems." But Douglas, Connor's father, argued, "He didn't have any problems in his studies before you appeared." The principal blushed and lowered her eyes at these words. At home, Douglas paced around the room indignantly. He was sure his son was doing well in school, and the new teacher's words had hurt his feelings. "How dare she?" he exclaimed. His wife agreed with him, saying, "Is it possible that our son is the silliest kid among all of his classmates? You need to discuss this problem with the principal, urgently." Douglas replied, "I have already talked to her. She promised to make an impact on this teacher, but I doubt the result." His wife then suggested that Douglas talk privately with the teacher and explain to her who he was, so she would finally understand how to treat their son properly. But Douglas responded, "I have already tried to hint to the stubborn teacher about how much modern equipment and teaching materials I have bought for the school recently." Miss Bailey only grinned and said that these gifts did not increase the amount of knowledge in Connor's head. "What a cheeky woman," exclaimed his wife, "and then we must get her fired." Connor overheard the entire conversation between his parents and was also outraged. He could not understand why this teacher allowed herself to be so unkind to him, the son of a respected businessman. So the boy decided to take revenge on Miss Bailey for her bad attitude, as he thought. He followed the woman after school and quickly figured out her address. It turned out to be a rather shabby house. Rather shabby 5-story building on the outskirts of the city, and Connor even grinned. He was amused by the fact that the person who taught others how to live lived in such a terrible place. After finding out from the local kids that the teacher lived on the first floor, Connor decided to prepare everything and come back tomorrow. The next evening, he was standing under the window of Miss Bailey's apartment, clutching a huge brick in his hand. He smiled maliciously, imagining in his mind how the glass would shatter into tiny pieces, and the teacher would shout in terror as the frosty winter air rushed into the room and made her shiver with cold. He decided to get close enough not to miss, but suddenly he noticed some movement inside the room. The boy became curious and stood on the bench under the window. He peered in and froze in shock. Miss Bailey was not alone in the room. A girl was sitting in a wheelchair next to her. She was about Connor's age. The woman carefully massaged her legs and then lifted her up, trying to keep her in a standing position. The window was slightly ajar for ventilation, and Connor could hear their conversation. "Mom, I can't do it anymore. Let's accept the fact that it's all useless. I'll never be able to walk again." "No, Audrey, don't you dare think like that and give up. You'll see, everything will change. You just have to keep following the doctor's recommendations." "That's enough, Mom. We'll never save enough money for an operation, and without it, everything is useless," cried out the girl in despair. The girl cried and Miss Bailey sobbed beside her. Connor watched all this and could not come to his senses. He felt shocked that the teacher had a disabled child, and they were living in such poor conditions. He also realized that this resilient and strong woman could cry so bitterly. Connor looked at the brick in his hand, and he suddenly felt unbearably ashamed. He might have been a bully, but he would never hurt a weak or abused person. And although his parents spoiled him immensely, they still managed to teach him true values. Connor threw away the brick and ran home. He could not forget the scene he had witnessed. He agonizingly tried to understand what had happened in his teacher's family and what kind of operation they were talking about. At first, Connor thought to ask the teacher directly, but he realized that it was unlikely she would discuss it with him. That was why he decided to act differently. He found Miss Bailey's daughter, Audrey, through social media. A happy-looking girl was looking at Connor from the picture on the page, and she was standing on her feet. There were many more pictures. In one picture, Audrey was on horseback. In another one, she and her mother were in the mountains. In the third one, they were gathering flowers in the countryside. It was clear that Audrey had no health problems before, and Connor was going to find out what had happened. He decided to make friends with Audrey through the internet and wrote her a message. Audrey responded and they began chatting. It turned out that they both liked dogs and had a lot in common. Audrey enjoyed everything Connor told her and also shared details about her life. She used to live with her mom and dad in another city. They had a big house, her father had his own business, and her mother was a teacher at a private school. However, their family fell apart when her father met another woman and threw Audrey and her mother out on the street. The girl remembered how she only had time to grab the bare necessities and her dog before they had to leave. They ended up staying with her mother's friend, but on the way there, they were in a car accident that resulted in Audrey's serious spinal injury. The doctors said she needed an expensive operation abroad, and her mother immediately reached out to her father for help. However, he refused to visit Audrey and claimed he had a new family and all the money was tied up in his business. This made Connor furious as he believed his father would do anything for him. Audrey continued to tell him that they moved into an apartment left by her grandmother and her mother found a job at a private school. Although she enjoys her job, there are some difficulties with certain students. Connor finally asked about her surgery and if it could help her. Audrey replied that it was possible but very expensive. No one was able to help them financially, and she fell silent. Connor realized he had hurt her feelings and felt guilty. He imagined her sitting and crying in front of the computer screen, and his heart ached. He made a decision to talk to his parents about the situation. Douglas expressed his sympathy for the girl and couldn't understand how her father could abandon her. Connor's mother also felt saddened by the situation. Douglas then asked his son how much money was needed for the operation, but Connor didn't know. He decided to speak directly to Miss Bailey, the teacher, and find out more. When he went to her office that evening, she was checking workbooks. When she saw him, she greeted him and asked if he was there to talk about Connor. You know, I've noticed a positive change in his behavior and learning lately. I think we could improve his grades from now on. I'm delighted to hear this, but that's not why I came to talk to you, answered Douglas, and told her the reason for his visit. He admitted that his son had met Miss Bailey's daughter on the internet, and he was very worried about her. Douglas added that he would like to help and asked for the necessary sum for the operation. Miss Bailey did not feel comfortable even talking about her daughter's illness, but Douglas insisted. After hearing how much she needed, the man realized that, even though it was a huge sum, it was quite realistic. He immediately estimated how much he would be able to contribute himself, how much his partners would be able to give, and also had a backup plan. He took the account details, said goodbye, and left. Miss Bailey was reflecting on how she had misjudged Douglas. She used to think that he only cared about his own well-being, but now it was clear that he was a good man, unlike her ex-husband. As she thought about her daughter's father, Miss Bailey let out a heavy sigh. She remembered how she had begged him to help their daughter, knowing he had the means to do so. But he was stubborn and even questioned his paternity in the end. That was the final straw. Miss Bailey had returned to her hometown and had been seeking help from various organizations, but to no avail. And then unexpectedly, help came from an unexpected source. The next day, Douglas called all his partners and asked them to join him in his charitable efforts. Many of them generously donated money, and soon the full amount was transferred to the clinic. The surgery had to be done abroad, and Douglas and his family accompanied Miss Bailey and Audrey to the airport. "Thank you. I will always remember your kindness," said Miss Bailey for the 100th time. "It's like you're saying goodbye. When you come back after the operation, you'll thank us," smiled Connor's mother. The woman was pleased with her husband's decision, and Connor was happy because Audrey would be able to walk. They became great friends during this time. The boy often visited his teacher, got to know her better, and realized that she was a very kind woman. Miss Bailey gave the boy extra lessons, and now he was one of the top students in his literature class. He also improved in other subjects and became more serious and mature. On one of his last visits to Audrey's home, Connor jokingly told the girl, "Well, I thought I would just be visiting a girl, but instead you've got me studying. Oh, of course. As soon as you wrote to me the first time, I knew you were serious about your education." "I realized you had a problem with grammar," laughed Audrey. "Why did you keep communicating with me then?" "Because I liked you right away," admitted Audrey, blushing. Connor smiled contentedly upon hearing that. Of course, he was insanely ashamed of that distant winter evening when he had been standing with a brick under the windows of their apartment, but he had no intention of sharing that information.